The Plaza Hotel stood like a sentinel in the heart of Manhattan, its limestone facade glowing amber under the October streetlights. For Alicia Carter, crossing its threshold felt like stepping into another world, one far removed from the cramped courthouse corridors and endless case files that had dominated her life in Chicago. Tonight, on the eve of her 35th birthday, she allowed herself to believe in luxury. The antique elevator carried her to the 15th floor, its brass fixtures reflecting the warm light that seemed to embrace every corner of this historic building. Her heels sank into the plush carpeting as she made her way down the corridor, keycard clutched, perhaps a bit too tightly, in her manicured hands. Room 1156, her home for the next 3 days. Alicia had planned this weekend meticulously, the way she approached everything in life. Every detail had been arranged with the precision that had made her one of Chicago's most formidable civil rights attorneys. The dinner reservations at Le Bernardin, tickets to Hamilton, even the exact time she'd spend at the Met. It was her way of maintaining control, of ensuring that even her moments of indulgence ran like a well-argued case. The room exceeded her expectations. Central Park stretched out beyond the window, like a dark canvas, painted with the twinkling lights of the Upper East Side. The number felt both heavy and hollow, an arbitrary milestone that somehow carried the weight of expectations her own, her parents', society's. After unpacking her carefully selected outfits, each one chosen to project the image of success she'd worked so hard to cultivate, Alicia treated herself to a long bath in the marble tub. The water was hot enough to turn her skin pink, and she allowed herself to sink beneath the surface, letting the sound of her own heartbeat drown out the distant symphony of city traffic. Later, wrapped in the hotel's plush robe, she sat cross-legged on the king-size bed, scrolling through messages from her colleagues back in Chicago. Cases didn't stop just because she did. The Henderson discrimination suit was heating up, and her inbox was filled with updates about depositions and motion deadlines. She forced herself to put the phone down. This weekend was about escape, about remembering who she was beyond the confines of her career. The night stretched on, and Alicia found herself unable to sleep despite the late hour. The city's energy seemed to seep through the walls, keeping her mind active even as her body begged for rest. She just decided to order some chamomile tea from room service when the first unusual sound caught her attention, a strange electronic beep from the door. At first, she dismissed it as hotel maintenance or perhaps a neighboring guest fumbling with their keycard, but then came the distinct click of her door lock disengaging. Before she could react, before she could even process what was happening, the heavy door swung open. The man who stumbled in was young, probably close to her age, dressed in what had clearly been an expensive suit before the night had taken its toll. His dark hair was disheveled, his tie hanging loose around his neck like a surrender flag. For a moment they just stared at each other, Alicia frozen on the bed, the stranger swaying slightly in the doorway. "This isn't my room," he slurred, though he made no move to leave. Instead, he took another unsteady step forward, his expensive Italian shoes scuffing against the carpet. Alicia's legal training kicked in, her mind automatically cataloging details even as her heart rate accelerated. Height, approximately 6 feet. Weight, around 180 pounds. Distinguished features, despite his current state. Expensive watch. Custom suit. This wasn't some random drunk. This was someone used to wealth and privilege. "You need to leave," she said firmly, reaching for her phone now. He smiled, and something in that expression sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't malicious exactly, but there was an entitled certainty in it that spoke of someone unaccustomed to hearing the word no. "Come on, don't be like that," he drawled, closing the door behind him. "We can have some fun. I'm Leonardo Pierce. Maybe you've heard of me? Youngest state senator in New York history." He spread his arms wide, as if presenting himself as a gift. The name registered immediately. Pierce Industries was a corporate behemoth, and their heir's entry into politics had made national news. Alicia had even admired some of his progressive stances from afar. Now, watching him leer at her from across the room, that admiration curdled into something bitter. "Senator or not, you're in my room without permission," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear beginning to bubble up inside her. "Leave now, or I'm calling security." His face darkened, entitlement warping into anger. "Do you know who I am? Who my family is?" He moved closer, alcohol making his movements unpredictable. "I was trying to be nice, but you're being very unreasonable." Alicia's fingers found the emergency button on her phone, but before she could press it, Leonardo lunged forward with surprising speed. His hand closed around her wrist, the expensive watch cutting against her skin. The phone clattered to the floor. "Let go of me," she demanded, her training in self-defense classes finally breaking through the shock. She twisted her arm the way she'd been taught, simultaneously bringing her knee up sharply. Leonardo grunted and stumbled backward, but his grip had already left marks on her skin, physical evidence. Her lawyer's mind noted, even in the midst of panic. She scrambled off the bed, putting distance between them. "You," he spat, all pretense of charm evaporating. "You have no idea what you're doing. One call from my father, and your career is over." The threat crystallized everything for Alicia. This wasn't just about tonight anymore. This was about power, about privilege, about all the cases she'd fought where money and influence had tried to silence justice. She straightened her spine, fear transforming into cold fury. "Get out," she said, each word a weapon. "You're on camera entering my room. Your keycard data is logged. I'm a civil rights attorney, and you just committed assault. Leave now, or I promise you, Senator Pierce, you'll be explaining to a lot more people than your father while you're breaking into women's hotel rooms at 2 a.m. Something in her tone must have penetrated his drunken haze. Leonardo stepped back, confusion and anger warring on his face. For a moment, Alicia thought he might lunge at her again, but instead, he turned and stumbled toward the door. "You'll regret this," he muttered as he fumbled with the handle. Nobody says no to a Pierce. The door slammed behind him, leaving Alicia alone in the suddenly too quiet room. Her hands were shaking as she retrieved her phone from where it had fallen, immediately dialing hotel security. As she waited for them to answer, she caught her reflection in the window, the city lights behind her creating a halo effect, and she noticed with detached interest that she was crying. This wasn't how her 35th birthday was supposed to begin, but as she touched the forming bruises on her wrist, Alicia knew that this night would change everything, not just for her, but for every woman who had ever been told that power and privilege put certain men above the law. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and began to document everything while it was fresh in her mind. The civil rights attorney in her knew that evidence was crucial, that memories could be questioned and twisted. The woman in her knew that this was just the beginning of a battle that would require every ounce of strength she possessed. Outside her window, New York continued its endless dance of lights and shadows, unaware that in room 1156 of the Plaza Hotel, a war had just begun, a war between justice and privilege, between truth and power, between one woman's determination and an empire built on silencing those who dared to say no. Alicia Carter had come to New York, searching for a memorable 35th birthday. Instead, she found herself at the beginning of a story that would challenge everything she believed about justice, power, and the price of standing up to those who thought themselves untouchable. The night stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, but Alicia was ready. She had spent her career fighting for others' rights. Now, it was time to fight for her own. And as she began photographing her injuries and writing her statement, she made a promise to herself. This would be the last time Leonardo Pierce, or any Pierce, used their power to hurt someone and walked away unscathed. The war had begun, and Alicia Carter intended to win. Chapter 2. The morning after dawn crept into the 13th Precinct Special Victims Unit at exactly 6:45 a.m., the October sunlight casting long shadows through the scratched windows of Interview Room 3. Alicia Carter sat perfectly still, her posture rigid despite the uncomfortable metal chair. Her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of cooling coffee, the bruises on her wrist having darkened to a deep purple, forming a stark contrast against her brown skin and the crisp white sleeve of her blazer. Detective Sophia Bennett had been with SVU for 15 years, long enough to read the silent language of trauma and determination in a victim's posture. She'd built her career on cases like this, where power and privilege collided with justice. Alicia Carter radiated both trauma and an iron resolve that Bennett rarely encountered. "Let's go through it one more time," Bennett said gently, her pen poised above a fresh page in her department-issued notebook. The detective's short black hair was streaked with early gray, each strand earned in rooms like this one. "Every detail matters, Miss Carter. Start from when you first checked into the plaza." Alicia nodded, her lawyer's mind appreciating the methodical approach, even as her hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup. "I checked in at 4:30 p.m. yesterday, room 1156. Everything was normal until approximately 2, 11:15 a.m., when I heard the electronic lock activate. As Alicia recounted the events, Bennett watched her client's composure crack and reform like ice in spring. The detective had already reviewed the hotel's security footage. Grainy images showing Leonardo Pierce's drunken journey through the lobby at 2:09 a.m., his confusion at the elevator bank at 2:13 a.m., and finally, at 2:17 a.m., the damning moment when his keycard somehow opened a door it shouldn't have been able to access. "The hotel security logs confirm your timeline," Bennett interjected, sliding a printout across the table. "Pierce's keycard was coded for room 1159, but the system shows it accessing 1156 at 2:17 a.m. There's definitely something wrong with their security protocols." Alicia leaned forward, her analytical mind seizing on this detail. "Could it have been deliberate tampering?" "We're looking into it," Bennett replied carefully. "The Plaza's systems were recently upgraded by Elite Secure Systems. Sometimes these high-end electronic locks have vulnerabilities." A sharp knock interrupted them. Officer Martinez poked his head in, his expression tense. "Detective Bennett, you need to see this. Channel 4 is running something about the Pierce kid. They're going live in 3 minutes. Bennett excused herself, leaving Alicia alone with her thoughts and the humming fluorescent lights. Through the window, she could see the precinct's bullpen coming alive with the morning shift change. Officers shuffled papers, sipped coffee, and cast curious glances toward the interview room. News traveled fast in New York, especially news involving the city's political elite. Across town, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Leonardo Pierce was experiencing the worst hangover of his life, and not just from the alcohol. He sat on the edge of his king-sized bed, head in his hands, as his father's voice sliced through the morning air like a blade. "Of all the stupid, reckless, thoughtless things you've done," Edward Pierce prowled the room like a caged predator, his custom suit unable to contain his fury. "Do you have any idea what you've put at risk?" "The Shanghai Electronics deal alone, Dad. I can explain," Leonardo attempted, but the words felt hollow even to him. Fragments of the previous night flashed through his mind. The celebration after closing the billion-dollar deal, the endless drinks at the Oak Room, and then her face, the woman in room 1156, the fear in her eyes when he'd grabbed her wrist. "Explain? Explain?" Edward's voice rose to a roar. He snatched up a remote, unmuting the massive TV, where a news anchor was already discussing the developing situation at the Plaza Hotel. "Sources say that State Senator Leonardo Pierce, son of business magnate Edward Pierce, was involved in an incident at the prestigious Plaza Hotel late last night. While details are still emerging, we've confirmed that police were called to the scene at approximately 2:30 a.m. The room spun, and not just from the hangover. Leonardo's phone buzzed constantly. His campaign manager, his chief of staff, various members of the party leadership, each message carrying the same underlying tone of panic. At 28, he was the youngest state senator in New York history, the progressive face of a conservative dynasty. Now, in a single drunken night, he'd put it all at risk. "The lawyers are already on it," Edward continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Judge Harrison owes me a favor, and I've got calls into the police commissioner. This will go away, but you need to do exactly what I tell you." Something in his father's tone made Leonardo look up. He'd heard this voice before, when accusations had been made against his uncle, when that journalist had asked too many questions about Pierce Industries' overseas labor practices, when anyone threatened the family's carefully constructed image of power and respectability. "Dad, he started, but Edward cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You will say nothing to anyone, not the press, not your staff, not even your sister. As far as you're concerned, last night never happened. You were celebrating the Shanghai deal, you had a few drinks, you went home. That's it. But I assaulted her." The words escaped before Leonardo could stop them. "I broke into her room. I grabbed her." "You did nothing of the sort." Edward's voice was ice. "If anyone asks, you were confused about your room number, made an honest mistake, and left immediately when you realized the error. The security footage will confirm this version of events." Leonardo's stomach lurched. "What do you mean, will confirm?" His father didn't answer, already typing rapidly on his phone. Outside, a helicopter thundered past the window, momentarily drowning out the endless chime of incoming messages. Leonardo caught his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, disheveled, pale, still wearing last night's clothes. He barely recognized himself. Back at the precinct, Detective Bennett returned to the interview room at 8:15 a.m., her expression carefully neutral. "Miss Carter, I need to ask you about something." The hotel security manager just called. They're having some technical issues with their video system, and some of last night's footage appears to be corrupted. Alicia's coffee cup crumpled in her grip, hot liquid spilling across the table. Already? They work fast. She reached into her bag, withdrawing her phone. "That's why I took my own pictures last night, timestamped, geotagged, and already uploaded to secure cloud storage. Parents are middle class, father's a retired state judge, mother's a high school principal. No significant skeletons in her closet." Edward absorbed this information with a predator's calculating gaze. It was precise, professional, and damning in its simplicity. No hysteria, no accusations of conspiracy, just a clear account of events that placed the focus squarely on Leonardo's actions and the hotel's suspicious security failures. Alicia's credentials and reputation made her harder to dismiss, and her experience in high-profile cases showed in every carefully chosen word. As the day progressed, battle lines were drawn. Political operators on both sides of the aisle began calculating the impact on various campaigns and initiatives. In the halls of power, whispered conversations and hurried meetings sketched out alliances and contingency plans. But in the quiet of the precinct interview room, none of that mattered. Detective Bennett and Alicia Carter continued their methodical work, building their case one detail at a time. They both knew what they were up against. Not just Leonardo Pierce and his drunken assault, but an entire system designed to protect the powerful from the consequences of their actions. "You understand what you're taking on?" Bennett asked, during a brief break at 2:30 p.m., her expression serious. "The Pierces don't just have money. They have influence in every corner of this city, judges, politicians, media." Alicia met the detective's gaze steadily. "When I was in law school, one of my professors said something I've never forgotten. She said that justice isn't about winning or losing. It's about forcing the truth into the light. Even if they bury this case, even if they destroy my career, they can't change what happened in that hotel room. And as long as one person is willing to speak the truth, their power isn't absolute." Bennett nodded slowly, a look of respect crossing her features. "Well, you're not alone. Whatever happens, you've got at least one detective in your corner." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the precinct windows as Alicia finally gathered her things to leave at 4:45 p.m. She had a hotel room to check out of, a flight to reschedule, and a war to prepare for. Her 35th birthday had become something she never expected, a line in the sand, a moment of choice between accepting the world as it was or fighting to change it. As she stepped out into the bustling New York street, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you're getting into. Walk away now while you still can." Alicia screenshot the message, added it to her evidence file, and kept walking. The Pierce family was about to learn that some people couldn't be bought, bullied, or silenced. Some people fought back. The morning after had become the beginning of something much bigger than a single assault case. It had become a battle for truth, for justice, and for the principle that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, was above the law. Detective Sophia Bennett watched from the precinct steps as Alicia disappeared into the crowd. The war had begun, and its first day was drawing to a close. But for Alicia Carter and Detective Bennett, for Leonardo Pierce and his empire-building father, for all the players in this unfolding drama, the real battles still lay ahead. Chapter 3, Power Plays. The Manhattan courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its limestone facade a monument to justice, or at least the appearance of it. Alicia Carter climbed the worn steps, her heels clicking against stone that had borne witness to countless battles between right and wrong, power and truth. Today would add another chapter to that long history. Behind her, a flank of reporters jockeyed for position, their questions overlapping into a cacophony of accusations and speculation. The story had exploded overnight, consuming New York's media landscape with an intensity that surprised even the Pierce family's experienced crisis management team. Inside, the courthouse's marble halls echoed with whispered conversations and hurried footsteps. Alicia made her way to courtroom 2B, where Judge Mariana Lopez would hear the initial motions in what the press had already dubbed the Plaza incident. At her side walked Detective Sophia Bennett, the detective's presence a quiet reminder that not everyone could be bought. They weren't the first to arrive. A small army of suits, the Pierce legal team had already staked out their territory. Leading them was Nathan Caldwell, Edward Pierce's personal attorney for the past 20 years. His reputation for crushing opposition through sheer legal attrition was legendary in New York circles. "Miss Carter." Caldwell's voice carried across the courtroom, smooth as aged whiskey. "A word in private?" Alicia exchanged glances with Detective Bennett before nodding. They moved to a corner of the courtroom, away from prying ears. Caldwell's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held the calculating look of a man used to solving problems with checkbooks. "This doesn't need to become a circus," he began, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "My client is prepared to make this right. Name your figure." Alicia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Your client, Mr. Caldwell, which one? The son who assaulted me, or the father trying to bury it?" "Both families could benefit from a quick, quiet resolution," Caldwell continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Think of your career, the opportunities that could open up with the right connections, the right support. Point or close with the wrong enemies," Alicia finished. "Save your breath, Mr. Caldwell. I'm not for sale." She turned to walk away, but his next words froze her in place. "The security footage from the plaza has been reviewed. Technical glitches, unfortunately, have rendered much of it unusable. The hotel's keycard logs show similar inconsistencies." Alicia turned back slowly. Amazing how quickly evidence can malfunction when Pierce Industries gets involved. Caldwell spread his hands in a gesture of mock helplessness. "Technology can be unreliable. Memories too, especially after a traumatic event. Are you certain you want to stake your reputation on such shifting sands?" Before Alicia could respond, the courtroom doors burst open. Leonardo Pierce entered, flanked by his own set of attorneys. He looked different in daylight, expensive suit perfectly pressed, hair immaculately styled, every inch the young political star. Only the shadows under his eyes hinted at his sleepless night. Their gazes met across the room for a moment. Something flickered in Leonardo's expression: shame, regret. But then his father's training reasserted itself, and his face became a politician's mask. Judge Lopez entered, her reputation for impartiality preceded by whispers of her ambitions for a federal appointment. The proceedings began with the usual formalities, but there was nothing usual about the tension filling the air. The Pierce team moved quickly, filing motion after motion, to dismiss, to seal records, to suppress evidence, to change venue. Each document was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering, designed to bury the truth under mountains of procedure. As Detective Bennett watched from her position near the gallery, she couldn't help but admire Alicia's composure. The young lawyer countered each motion with precision, her responses revealing an intimate knowledge of New York state law that surprised the Pierce team. She hadn't spent the night weeping, she'd spent it preparing. "Your Honor," Caldwell rose for his final argument. "Given the high-profile nature of this case and the potential for prejudicial media coverage, we move for an immediate gag order on all parties." "Interesting timing," Alicia responded before the judge could speak. "Is it the media coverage that concerns you, Mr. Caldwell, or the fact that the hotel's conveniently corrupted security footage has already been backed up on secure servers?" A ripple went through the courtroom. In the gallery, Detective Bennett allowed herself a small smile. They'd spent hours the previous night working with cybersecurity experts, ensuring that copies of the original footage were preserved before they could be lost. The morning wore on, a chess match of legal strategies where every move carried consequences beyond the immediate case. During a brief recess, Alicia noticed Leonardo in heated discussion with his father near the water fountain. Their whispered argument carried just enough for her to catch fragments. "Can't keep covering everything up. Your future, the family name. What about what's right?" Edward Pierce's response was too low to hear, but the way Leonardo's shoulders slumped spoke volumes. The young senator returned to his seat, not meeting anyone's eyes. Detective Bennett used the recess to make several quick calls, following up on leads from other luxury hotels in the city. The pattern they were uncovering was disturbing. Similar incidents, all quietly resolved, all involving the Pierce family or their associates. As the hearing resumed, a commotion outside the courtroom drew everyone's attention. The doors opened to admit an unexpected figure, William Foster, CEO of the Plaza Hotel Group. His presence sent a clear message. The Pierce influence reached far. Foster was immediately called to approach the bench, where a whispered conference began between him, the judge, and the attorneys. Alicia watched the body language, noting the subtle shifts in power dynamics. When Lopez called for another recess, the air had changed. "Miss Carter," The judge's voice was carefully neutral. "My chambers, please. Mr. Caldwell, you as well." The judge's chambers were a study in federal judicial aspirations. Law books perfectly arranged. Photographs with political figures strategically placed. Lopez settled behind her desk, fingers steepled. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence," she began, "and I have concerns about proceeding with this case as filed. The hotel's investigation suggests a possible technical malfunction with their security system, a glitch that may have affected multiple rooms that night." Alicia felt her jaw tighten. A glitch that coincidentally erased all evidence of Senator Pierce's actions? "Miss Carter," Lopez's tone held a warning. "Serious allegations require serious evidence. Without the hotel's security footage—" "I have photographs," Alicia interrupted. "Time-stamped, geotagged. I have my recorded statement from immediately after the incident. I have witnesses from hotel security who responded to my call. And, as of an hour ago, I have 2 other women who've come forward with similar experiences involving the Pierce family at different hotels. That last part was a calculated risk." The women had contacted Detective Bennett that morning, but their statements weren't yet formalized. The effect on the room, however, was immediate. Caldwell's phone was in his hand instantly, no doubt texting Edward Pierce. Lopez's expression flickered between concern and calculation. The political landscape was shifting under their feet. "If you'll excuse me," Alicia stood, smoothing her skirt. "I believe my statement to the press is scheduled for the courthouse steps in 20 minutes. I'm sure they'll be very interested in hearing about the hotel's convenient technical difficulties." She left them there, stepping back into the marble hallway where Detective Bennett waited. The detective fell into step beside her, both women walking with the measured pace of those who knew they were being watched. "2 other women," Bennett murmured. "3 now," Alicia replied quietly. "Your tip about checking other luxury hotels was good. Seems the Pierces have a pattern. They push through the courthouse doors into a wall of cameras and microphones." The reporters surged forward, questions flying like arrows. "Miss Carter, is it true the hotel footage has been lost? Are you pursuing civil charges against Pierce Industries? Senator Pierce claims he was intoxicated and confused about his room number. Any response?" Alicia took her place at the microphone, the stone steps of justice solid beneath her feet. The prepared statement in her pocket remained there. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "This case is not about a single night or a single incident," she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. "It's about power and how it's wielded in the dark corners of our society. It's about systems designed to protect the privileged few at the expense of everyone else. And most importantly, it's about truth." Detective Bennett positioned herself strategically behind Alicia, her eyes scanning the crowd. Years of experience had taught her that moments like these could turn dangerous quickly, especially when powerful people felt threatened. "The Pierce family believes they can make this disappear," Alicia continued, her voice steady and clear. "They believe their influence can erase evidence, silence witnesses, and bend justice to their will. They're wrong. For every security video they corrupt, there are 10 victims finding the courage to speak. For every judge they pressure, there are 100 citizens demanding accountability." In his office 30 stories above Manhattan, Edward Pierce watched the live broadcast, his knuckles white around his crystal tumbler. Beside him, Leonardo sat in silence, something shifting behind his eyes. "To anyone else who has experienced similar incidents," Alicia continued, "know that you're not alone. Know that your story matters. Know that the time for silence is over." The press conference exploded into questions, but Alicia had said what she needed to say. As she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted number. "Conference room, Bar Association Building, 3:00 p.m. COME alone. Trust me, you need to hear this." The sender's identity was hidden, but the message originated from a Pierce Industries email server. Alicia showed it to Detective Bennett, who immediately began making calls to set up surveillance. "It could be a trap," Bennett warned, her years of experience evident in her tone. "The Pierces are feeling cornered, and cornered animals are dangerous. Or it could be someone on the inside who's finally had enough," Alicia countered. "Either way, we need to know." The power plays were escalating, the battlefield expanding beyond a single courtroom. But as Alicia walked down the courthouse steps, she felt stronger than ever. The Pierce family had spent generations building their fortress of influence, but they'd never faced an opponent who understood that true power lay in the truth. Detective Bennett watched as Alicia navigated through the media scrum, noting how the young lawyer had already grown more confident in handling the spotlight. This case was becoming something bigger than either of them had anticipated, a potential turning point in the ongoing battle between privilege and justice. The war for justice was far from over, but today had shown that even the mightiest walls could crack when struck in the right place. As reporters shouted questions about her next moves, Alicia allowed herself a small smile. The real power play was just beginning, and with allies like Detective Bennett by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, a reminder that time was both friend and enemy in this fight. For Alicia Carter and Detective Sophia Bennett, for the other women finding their voices, and for the Pierce Empire facing its first real challenge, the game of power was entering a new phase. The moves made today would echo far beyond these marble halls, touching lives and changing futures in ways none of them could yet imagine. Chapter 4. The Meteor Storm. 3 weeks after the Plaza incident, the New York Times newsroom hummed with the electric tension of a breaking story. Veteran reporter Daniel Rivera stared at his computer screen, cursor blinking at the end of a sentence that could shake the foundations of one of the city's most powerful families. The headline glared back at him in bold type: "Pattern of privilege, new allegations emerge in Pierce case." His phone buzzed, the fourth message in an hour from Edward Pierce's PR team, alternating between veiled threats and subtle bribes. Rivera ignored it, focusing instead on the interview transcripts spread across his desk. 2 additional women had come forward over the past week, emboldened by Alicia Carter's refusal to be silenced. Their stories, spanning the past 5 years, painted a disturbing picture of wealth, power, and impunity. Across town, in a sleek midtown office, Alicia sat with Detective Sophia Bennett, monitoring coverage across different networks. The story had evolved methodically over the past weeks, from initial reports of a minor incident at the Plaza to increasingly detailed investigations into the Pierce family's pattern of behavior. "Look at how carefully they're shifting the narrative," Bennett noted, gesturing to one of the conservative networks where a panel was discussing Alicia's ambitious career moves and questionable timing. "They've had 3 weeks to craft their defense, and this is the best they can do." Alicia nodded, her expression grim. "They're running their standard playbook: discredit the victim, minimize the incident, bury the story in technical details about hotel security. But they're not counting on what's coming next." She checked her watch. Rivera has been fact-checking for 2 weeks. He should be publishing within the hour. The story had developed beyond the single incident at the Plaza Hotel. Through careful investigative work, Detective Bennett's methodical investigation had uncovered a pattern spanning years. Similar incidents at luxury hotels, all involving the Pierce family or their inner circle, all quietly resolved with non-disclosure agreements and generous settlements. "Miss Carter," Alicia's assistant poked her head in, "you might want to see this. They've got Leonardo Pierce, live on Morning America." The young senator appeared perfectly composed on screen, his suit immaculate, his expression appropriately contrite. But Alicia, who had looked into those same eyes in the darkness of her hotel room, could see the strain beneath the polished surface. "I want to be clear," Leonardo was saying, "that I have the utmost respect for Miss Carter and take her allegations seriously. However, I must categorically deny any wrongdoing. The events of that night were clearly a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," Bennett muttered. "That's what they're calling assault these days." But Alicia had noticed something else. A slight tremor in Leonardo's hands, the way his eyes kept shifting off camera, where his father undoubtedly stood watching. She recognized the signs of someone trapped in a narrative, not entirely of their own making. The interview continued, with Leonardo carefully repeating his prepared statements about confusion, intoxication, and regret for any misunderstandings. But when the host pressed him about the other women beginning to come forward, a crack appeared in his facade. I can't speak to those allegations," he stammered, clearly deviating from his script. "But I think it's important that we, as a society, listen to women who come forward and take their experiences seriously." The feed cut abruptly to commercial, but the damage was done. Within hours, social media exploded with clips of the interview, analyzing every word, every gesture. Some saw a guilty man squirming, others a political hit job in progress. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in the tangled space between. Alicia's phone rang. "Rivera from the Times. The piece is going live at 3. You might want to be somewhere secure when it hits." The Pierces are going to go nuclear. She thanked him and turned to Bennett. It's about to get ugly. The Times has financial records linking Pierce Industries to a series of payments. Hush money to hotel staff, settlements to other victims, even campaign contributions to judges who buried similar cases. The detective's expression hardened. How far back does it go? 5 years, documented solidly. Hints of more going back further, but nothing we can prove yet. The paper's legal team spent 2 weeks verifying everything. The story broke like a tsunami, washing away the careful narratives the Pierce PR team had constructed over the past weeks. Rivera had done his job thoroughly, backing every allegation with documentary evidence and multiple sources. The pattern was undeniable. The Pierces had been using their money and influence to create a consequence-free playground for themselves and their associates. By early evening, the media landscape transformed. Cable news channels abandoned their usual programming to run wall-to-wall coverage. Political allies began distancing themselves from Leonardo. Pierce Industries' stock price plummeted as shareholders panicked. In a quiet corner of the courthouse cafeteria, Alicia and Bennett watched the chaos unfold on their phones. "This is where it gets dangerous," the detective warned. "The Pierces are wounded now. That makes them unpredictable." As if confirming her words, Alicia's phone lit up with a message from an unlisted number. "You've made your point. Meeting tonight, 8:00 p.m., Street Patrick's Cathedral. Come alone if you want to end this cleanly." She showed the message to Bennett, who immediately began texting her contacts. "We'll have plainclothes officers in place, but you're not going alone. This has entrap written all over it. Or surrender," Alicia mused. "Did you see Leonardo's face during that interview? He's cracking. Maybe he's ready to break from his father's script." Before they could discuss it further, Alicia's assistant rushed in, tablet in hand. "You need to see this. Someone's leaked your personal information online, everything. Home address, case files, college records, even medical history. The doxing was comprehensive, clearly the work of professionals." Within hours, Twitter and Reddit were aflame with out-of-context details from Alicia's past, each carefully selected to paint her in the worst possible light. Old boyfriends were suddenly giving interviews about her aggressive ambition. College classmates remembered her as always looking for attention, but the Pierce machine had miscalculated. The more they tried to smear Alicia, the more support she gained. Women's groups began organizing rallies outside Pierce Industries headquarters. #BelieveAlicia trended nationwide. Other lawyers began coming forward with stories of cases buried by Pierce money. In the midst of the media frenzy, Alicia and Leonardo had their first unplanned encounter since that night at the plaza. It happened in the courthouse parking garage. She was leaving a meeting with prosecutors. He was arriving for a grand jury appearance. For a moment, they just stared at each other in the fluorescent-lit concrete space. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for that night, for everything that's happened since." Alicia studied him carefully. The polished political facade was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Are you sorry enough to tell the truth?" Before he could answer, the elevator dinged. Edward Pierce emerged, flanked by lawyers. The moment shattered. Leonardo's mask slipped back into place as his father's hand clamped onto his shoulder, steering him away. But in that brief exchange, something had shifted. The meteor storm had stripped away pretenses, forcing everyone to confront the truth beneath the carefully constructed narratives. For Alicia and Detective Bennett, for Leonardo Pierce and his empire-building father, for all the players in this unfolding drama, the real battles still lay ahead. The day wore on, headlines piling upon headlines. Pierce Industries announced an emergency board meeting for the following morning. Political commentators speculated about Leonardo's future in the party. Social media continued its relentless dissection of everyone involved. In her office, Alicia prepared for the cathedral meeting, despite Bennett's continued objections. "We need to end this," she argued, "not just for me, but for all the women who've been silenced. If Leonardo's ready to break ranks, this could change everything." The detective reluctantly agreed to coordinate security, but her warning hung in the air. "Just remember, cornered animals are most dangerous when they appear to be surrendering." As evening approached, the meteor storm showed no signs of abating, but beneath the surface chaos, powerful forces were aligning for the next phase of the battle. The truth had been unleashed, and no amount of money or influence could put it back in its box. Alicia stood at her office window, watching the city lights blink on as dusk settled over Manhattan. The Times article had changed the game. but the war was far from over. Tonight's meeting at Street Patrick's could be a trap, a surrender, or something else entirely. Her phone buzzed with another message. Rivera again, new leads coming in. More victims, different hotels, same pattern. This goes deeper than just the Pierces. Be careful. She turned from the window to find Detective Bennett in the doorway, car keys in hand. Ready? Alicia nodded, gathering her coat. The media storm had served its purpose, forcing the truth into the light. Now was time to see who would break first under its pressure. Chapter 5. Unexpected Allies Street. Patrick's Cathedral rose like a Gothic dream in the heart of Manhattan, its spires piercing the evening sky. Detective Sophia Bennett positioned her plainclothes officers strategically around the perimeter, each one carefully chosen for their reliability and discretion. This meeting could change everything, or it could be an elaborate trap. Alicia Carter climbed the cathedral steps alone, her heels echoing against ancient stone. The massive wooden doors stood open, welcoming evening worshippers and tourists alike. Inside, the vast space was dimly lit, punctuated by the flickering of votive candles and the last rays of sunset streaming through stained glass. She found Leonardo Pierce in the north transept, sitting in the last pew, his usual political polish stripped away by exhaustion and stress. He didn't look up as she sat beside him, keeping a careful distance between them. The hotel security system, he began without preamble, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just tampered with that night. It's been happening for years. My father has people inside every major hotel in the city. Alicia remained silent, letting him continue. Outside, Detective Bennett monitored the conversation through the small transmitter hidden in Alicia's watch, her team ready to move at the first sign of trouble. There's a pattern, Leonardo continued, running a hand through his disheveled hair. When someone from the family or our inner circle needs something covered up, there's a protocol. Security footage disappears, keycard logs get corrupted, witnesses receive generous bonuses or sudden promotions. Why are you telling me this now? He finally turned to look at her, and in the cathedral's dim light, she saw something she hadn't expected: fear. Because my father's planning something worse than the usual cleanup. I heard him on the phone. He's talking about making you disappear. Not your career or your reputation. You. In the surveillance van parked outside, Detective Bennett straightened, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. But Leonardo was still talking, the words tumbling out like a confession. I can't do it anymore, the lies, the cover-ups, watching him destroy anyone who threatens his power. What happened that night at the plaza? I was drunk, yes, but that's no excuse. I knew exactly what I was doing, because I'd seen it done before, by my uncle, by my cousins, by my father's friends. We were untouchable, or so we thought. Alicia studied his profile, noting the tremor in his hands, the slight catch in his voice. Your father's influence runs deep. Coming forward could cost you everything. Not coming forward will cost me more. He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a USB drive. This contains proof, security protocols, payment records, names of hotel employees on our payroll. My father doesn't know I have it. He doesn't know I've been collecting evidence for years, telling myself I'd use it someday to force changes from within. The cathedral's massive space seemed to hold its breath as Alicia took the drive. Why now? Why me? Because you did what no one else dared. You stood up to us. And because, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, when I saw you in that hotel room, something broke inside me. All the justifications, all the excuses we'd used over the years, they suddenly felt hollow. I saw myself through your eyes, and I hated what I'd become. Outside, Detective Bennett's team reported movement, black SUVs approaching from multiple directions. We need to wrap this up, she murmured into her communicator. Company's coming. As if on cue, Alicia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, the cathedral. Now, end this. My father's people, Leonardo confirmed, glancing nervously toward the entrance. We need to move. There's a side door through the sacristy. My security detail doesn't know about it. They rose quietly, making their way through the shadowed church. Behind them, footsteps echoed on marble as multiple individuals entered the main space. Detective Bennett's voice crackled through Alicia's earpiece. We've got 8 hostiles inside, more in vehicles outside. Moving to intercept, the sacristy door was locked, but Leonardo produced a key. Being a major donor has its privileges, he explained as they slipped through. The narrow corridor beyond was dark, lit only by emergency exit signs. Miss Carter, Edward Pierce's voice boomed through the cathedral, amplified by the acoustics. "This has gone far enough. Let's discuss this like reasonable people." But they were already emerging into a side street, where Detective Bennett waited with reinforcements. "Your father's men are surrounding the building," she informed Leonardo. "You sure you want to do this?" He nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. "I should have done it years ago." They made it to the police vehicles just as Edward's security team realized they'd been outmaneuvered. As they pulled away, Alicia watched Leonardo in the rear-view mirror. The weight of his decision seemed to press him deeper into the seat with each passing block. Back at the precinct, Detective Bennett's cybercrime unit began processing the USB drive's contents. The evidence was damning. Detailed records of security system, overrides, payments to hotel staff, and internal communications discussing various incidents that needed handling. "This goes beyond just hotel security," one analyst reported, scrolling through encrypted emails. "They've got people in the DA's office, the city council, even the police department. It's a whole network designed to protect not just the Pierces, but dozens of wealthy families." Alicia watched the information unfold on multiple screens, each revelation adding to the larger picture of corruption and privilege. Beside her, Leonardo identified key players and explained coded references, his insider knowledge proving invaluable. "My father didn't build this system," he explained. "He inherited it. These families, they've been protecting each other for generations. When I was groomed to enter politics, learning about these arrangements was part of my education." Detective Bennett leaned against her desk, processing the implications. "This is bigger than we thought. Taking down a network like this, it won't be easy. These people, they're not just rich. They're powerful enough to make problems disappear." "Not anymore," Alicia declared, her voice firm. "Not if we do this right." As if in response to her words, the precinct's night shift supervisor rushed in. "You need to see this. Edward Pierce just called an emergency press conference." On the mounted TV, Edward Pierce stood at a podium, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished. "It has come to my attention that my son, Senator Leonardo Pierce, has chosen to cooperate with authorities regarding certain allegations. While I am disappointed by his decision, I want to make it clear that Pierce Industries has always operated within the law." "He's scared," Leonardo observed, a mix of emotions crossing his face. "I've never seen him scared before." The press conference continued, but Edward's carefully crafted statement was overshadowed by breaking news banners. "Pierce whistleblower, Senator turns on family and hotel security scandal rocks, NYC elite." Alicia's phone began lighting up with messages from other attorneys, journalists, and activists. The story was exploding, but this time, the narrative couldn't be controlled by Pierce money or influence. "We need to move fast," Detective Bennett advised, already coordinating with other precincts. "Once these families realize the extent of what we have, they'll start destroying evidence, pressuring witnesses." "I can help with that," Leonardo offered. "I know their playbook, their contingency plans, and I know where they'll hit first." The night stretched on, a complex operation taking shape. Detective Bennett's team worked to secure evidence and protect potential witnesses. Alicia coordinated with prosecutors, building cases that could withstand the inevitable legal challenges. And Leonardo, the unlikely ally, provided insights that only an insider could offer. Around midnight, Alicia stepped out for air, finding Leonardo already on the precinct steps. The city hummed around them, unaware that its power structure was being rewritten in the building behind them. "Your father will never forgive you," she said quietly. "I know." He stared into the distance, his profile sharp against the city lights. "But I couldn't forgive myself if I stayed silent. What happened at the plaza, it wasn't just about that night. It was about all the nights before, all the people we'd hurt, all the times we'd convinced ourselves that our privilege made it okay." Before Alicia could respond, Detective Bennett emerged with urgent news. "We've got movement at multiple hotels, security teams accessing servers, staff being called in for emergency meetings. They're starting the cleanup. They don't know what we have," Leonardo confirmed. "What I've been documenting, they can't erase it all." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Search warrants were executed, servers seized, key witnesses brought in for protection. The network that had protected New York's elite for generations began to unravel, its threads pulled apart by the combined efforts of an assault survivor, a determined detective, and a son turning against his own legacy. As dawn approached, Alicia received another anonymous text. "You have no idea what you've started. This isn't over." She showed it to Detective Bennett, who merely nodded. "They're right about one thing, this isn't over. But for the first time, we've got a real chance at ending it." Leonardo, reviewing security footage from another hotel, looked up. "My father once told me that power isn't about having money or influence. It's about making people believe you're untouchable. Tonight we showed them that no one is untouchable." The sun rose over Manhattan, its light touching the spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral, where this phase of the battle had begun. Inside the precinct, the unlikely allies continued their work, knowing that the hardest fight still lay ahead. But something had fundamentally changed. The wall of silence had been breached, the machinery of privilege exposed. Detective Bennett watched Alicia and Leonardo working together, noting how trauma and redemption had forged an unexpected partnership. Sometimes, she reflected, justice came from the most unlikely sources. Sometimes, the key to fighting power was finding allies within its very foundations. The media storm would soon reach new heights. The investigations would face fierce resistance, and the Pierce Empire would fight back with everything it had. But for now, in the quiet morning hours, 3 people who had started as victim, investigator, and perpetrator had become something else entirely, partners in dismantling a system that had protected the powerful for far too long. The war was far from over, but its nature had changed. With Leonardo's evidence and insider knowledge, Detective Bennett's investigative skills, and Alicia's legal expertise, they had the tools to fight back. The unexpected allies had become a force that even Edward Pierce couldn't ignore, and the ripples of their partnership would soon become waves, crashing against the foundations of power and privilege in New York City. Chapter 6. The first hearing. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned cold and clear, the October sun casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. News vans had been parked there since midnight, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers seeking light. The media presence had grown exponentially since Leonardo Pierce's defection from his father's camp. Inside the courthouse's marble halls, Alicia Carter stood before a mirror in the women's restroom, adjusting her suit jacket with practiced precision. The bruises on her wrist had faded to a dull yellow, but she left them visible, a reminder of where this journey had begun. Detective Sophia Bennett appeared in the mirror behind her. "Security is in place. We've got plainclothes officers throughout the building, and the Pierce security team has been restricted to the public areas only. How's our witness list looking?" 3 hotel employees ready to testify about the security system tampering, 2 former victims willing to establish pattern, and of course Bennett paused meaningfully. "Leonardo." Alicia finished, the name still feeling strange on her tongue, not quite friend, no longer quite enemy. The main courtroom was already packed when they arrived, the gallery a sea of faces representing every major news outlet in the country. Edward Pierce sat in the front row behind his army of lawyers, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by recent events. He didn't look at his son, who sat with the prosecution team, his posture rigid with tension. Judge Mariana Lopez entered, her expression inscrutable. The same judge, who had seemed ready to bury the case weeks ago, now faced a very different landscape. Leonardo's evidence had exposed not just the Pierce family's crimes, but an entire system of corruption that touched her own colleagues. "Before we begin," Lopez announced, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "I want to address the various motions to recuse that have been filed. After careful consideration, I am denying these motions. However, in the interest of complete transparency, I will be placing on record every interaction I have ever had with Pierce Industries or its subsidiaries." A murmur ran through the gallery. Edward Pierce's jaw tightened visibly. The judge was protecting herself by exposing connections his lawyers might have used as leverage. The prosecution's opening statement was delivered by Victoria Salazar, a veteran ADA who had built her career taking on powerful defendants. She laid out the case methodically: the assault at the plaza, the pattern of similar incidents, the systematic corruption of hotel security systems, and the broader conspiracy to protect wealthy perpetrators. "This case," Salazar concluded, "is not just about one night or one defendant. It's about a system that has allowed the privileged few to operate under different rules than the rest of us. Today, we begin dismantling that system." The defense team, led by Nathan Caldwell, countered with a strategy that carefully separated Leonardo's actions from the broader allegations. Yes, there had been security system tampering, but that was a corporate matter. Yes, there were other incidents, but they weren't relevant to this specific case. They painted Leonardo as a troubled young man who had made a drunken mistake, not a participant in a criminal conspiracy. Throughout the morning session, Alicia watched the legal dance with professional appreciation, noting how each side worked to frame the narrative. But her attention kept returning to Leonardo, who sat quietly, making notes, his familiar political mask replaced by something more genuine and uncertain. During the lunch recess, an unexpected development, Judge Lopez requested both Alicia and Leonardo meet her in chambers. Detective Bennett insisted on accompanying them, positioning herself by the door as the judge addressed them. Off the record, Lopez began, removing her reading glasses. "I want to understand something. Senator Pierce, you're essentially torpedoing not just your career, but an entire power structure that has benefited you your entire life. Why?" Leonardo glanced at Alicia before answering. "Because that power structure is poison, Your Honor. It corrupted me, my family, everyone it touched. What happened at the plaza, it wasn't an isolated incident or a drunken mistake. It was the inevitable result of believing we were above consequences." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to Alicia. "And you, Miss Carter? You could have accepted a settlement, built your practice with Pierce money. Instead, you've taken on one of the most powerful families in New York. With respect, Your Honor, this stopped being about me the moment I learned about the other victims. This is about justice, not just for us, but for everyone who was silenced by money and influence." Lopez studied them both for a long moment. "I've been on the bench for 20 years. I've seen every kind of case, every kind of lawyer, every kind of defendant, but I've never seen anything quite like this." She rose, signaling the end of the meeting. "Whatever happens in that courtroom, remember this moment. Remember why you chose truth over power." As they left chambers, Leonardo touched Alicia's elbow lightly. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" Detective Bennett found them an empty conference room, positioning herself outside, while Alicia and Leonardo faced each other across a battered table. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of their shared history filling the space between them. "I've been trying to write you a letter," Leonardo finally said, his voice quiet, trying to find the right words to apologize, to explain. "But everything sounds hollow. Why did you do it?" Alicia asked, the question that had haunted her since that night. "Not just the assault, all of it. The cover-up, the threats, letting your father's machine try to destroy me." He didn't answer immediately, seeming to search for honesty rather than excuses, "Because it was easier than facing what I'd become. Every time my father solved a problem with money or influence, it reinforced the idea that we were different, special, above the rules. That night at the plaza, I wasn't just drunk. I was drunk on power. And now," he laughed, without humor, "now I'm sober. And like any addict facing their demons, I'm terrified, not just of my father's retaliation or losing my career. I'm terrified of who I was, of how easily I justified hurting people." Alicia studied him, remembering the entitled man who had burst into her hotel room, seeing how he had changed. "Redemption isn't easy. You're dismantling not just your father's empire, but everything you were raised to believe. I know. But every time I waver, I remember your face that night, the fear, the anger, the determination. You saw me, not as a Pierce, not as a senator, but as what I really was, a predator protected by privilege." He met her gaze steadily. "I can't change what I did, but I can help ensure it never happens again." Their conversation was interrupted by Detective Bennett's knock. They're reconvening. The afternoon session focused on evidence, with the prosecution methodically presenting their case. Hotel security logs, text messages, financial records, each piece carefully documented and authenticated. Leonardo's USB drive had provided the key that unlocked a vast conspiracy of silence and protection. As various witnesses took the stand, Alicia observed the gallery's reactions. Some of New York's most prominent families were present, watching their protective shield of money and influence slowly crumble. She recognized faces from charity galas and society pages, all now pale with the realization that their secrets might not stay buried. Edward Pierce's composure cracked only once, when a former hotel security director detailed how the Pierce protocol worked, the systematic erasure of evidence, the strategic promotions or transfers of witnesses, the careful manipulation of digital records. The elder Pierce's hand tightened on his armrest until his knuckles went white, but he maintained his mask of indifference. The hearing's final moments carried a weight that everyone in the courtroom could feel. Judge Lopez reviewed her notes carefully before speaking. Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause to proceed with all charges. Furthermore, I am referring evidence of corporate conspiracy and obstruction of justice to the District Attorney's Office for additional investigation." She fixed Edward Pierce with a steady gaze. "This court will not be party to any further attempts to suppress evidence or intimidate witnesses. The full weight of judicial authority will be brought against anyone who attempts to interfere with these proceedings." Outside the courthouse, the media circus reached new heights. Reporters shouted questions, photographers jostled for position, and satellite trucks transmitted the story across the nation. But in a quiet corridor away from the chaos, Alicia, Detective Bennett, and Leonardo shared a moment of somber victory. "This is just the beginning," Bennett reminded them. "The real fight starts now." Leonardo nodded, loosening his tie. "My father won't take this quietly. He's probably already activated every connection he has, calling in every favor." "Let him," Alicia said firmly. "We've got something more powerful than money or influence. We've got the truth." As they prepared to face the press, Alicia reflected on how far they'd come. From that night at the plaza, the entitled senator who had forced his way into her room was gone, replaced by an ally in the fight against systemic corruption. The detective who had taken her statement was now a trusted friend and protector, and she herself had transformed from victim to advocate, helping to expose a generational pattern of abuse and cover-ups. The sun was setting as they finally emerged onto the courthouse steps, its light catching the bronze statue of justice that towered above them. Alicia thought about Judge Lopez's words about choosing truth over power. The choice had been made not just by her and Leonardo, but by every witness who had come forward, every employee who had exposed corruption, every person who had decided that enough was enough. The first hearing was over, but its implications would ripple through New York society for years to come. A system built on money, influence, and the assumption of impunity had begun to crack, and in its place, something new was emerging, a partnership forged between unlikely allies, united in the pursuit of justice that money couldn't buy and power couldn't suppress. Edward Pierce's car pulled away from the curb, its tinted windows hiding his expression, but Alicia didn't need to see his face to know that the real battle was just beginning. The preliminary hearing had set the stage for a confrontation that would test not just the legal system, but the very foundations of power and privilege in New York City. Chapter 7. Family ties. The Chicago winter had always felt different from New York's roar, somehow more honest in its brutality. Alicia Carter stood in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of her former life, debate team trophies, law school acceptance letters, family photos that told the story of a path carefully planned and meticulously followed. Her father, retired Judge David Carter, stood in the doorway, his normally commanding presence diminished by age and the weight of unspoken truths. The morning paper lay on the kitchen table downstairs, its headlines screaming about new revelations in the Pierce case. "You should have told me, Dad," Alicia said quietly, holding up the manila envelope Leonardo had sent her the previous day. Inside were court documents from 15 years ago, a case her father had presided over involving Pierce Industries and a young woman whose story sounded painfully familiar. "I wanted to protect you," David replied, his voice heavy with regret. "When I saw the news about what happened at the plaza, I knew it would all come out eventually." Detective Sophia Bennett, who had accompanied Alicia to Chicago, watched the exchange from her position by the window. The detective had insisted on coming after the latest round of threats had escalated from anonymous messages to more concrete dangers. "Protect me?" Alicia's voice cracked with disbelief. "By hiding the fact that the Pierces had done this before? That they pressured you to dismiss a case just like mine?" David moved into the room, sinking onto the edge of the bed that still bore the purple comforter from Alicia's teenage years. "It wasn't that simple. They had information about your mother's family, about financial irregularities that could have destroyed her school district. So you buried the case. It wasn't a question. I did what I thought I had to do to protect our family." He looked up at his daughter, his eyes pleading for understanding. "But I never forgot. Every case after that, every time I had to make a tough decision, I remembered that young woman and what my choice cost her." Alicia turned to the window, watching snow fall on the familiar streets of her childhood. Everything looked different now, tainted by the revelation that her own father had been part of the system she was fighting against. Her phone buzzed. "Leonardo, there's more. Your father's case wasn't isolated. They had judges all over the country under similar pressure family secrets. financial dirt, whatever it took to maintain control. Detective Bennett moved closer, reading the message over Alicia's shoulder. This explains why they're fighting so hard. It's not just about protecting the Pierce name anymore. It's about keeping the whole system from collapsing. Did Mom know? Alicia asked her father suddenly. David shook his head. I never told her. She was so proud of my judicial career, of our family's reputation for integrity. I couldn't bear to see that pride turn to shame. The irony of his words hung heavy in the air. Pride, shame, reputation, the same forces that had driven the Pierces' actions for generations, were present in her own family's choices. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Elizabeth Carter, Alicia's mother, called up that Detective Bennett had a visitor, another officer from the Chicago PD, with urgent information. Stay here, Bennett instructed, her hand moving instinctively to her weapon as she descended the stairs. In the moments of silence that followed, Alicia studied her father's face, the lines of worry, the shadows of old decisions. The woman from your case, she said finally. What happened to her? Sophia Morales. David supplied the name with painful clarity. She moved away after the case was dismissed. I tried to track her down years later, to apologize, maybe try to make things right, but she disappeared completely. Like so many others, Alicia murmured. Her research had uncovered dozens of similar stories, women who had faced the Pierce machine and been forced to rebuild their lives elsewhere, their silence bought with combinations of threats and settlements. Detective Bennett returned, her expression grim. We've got a problem. Chicago PD just received an anonymous tip about judicial misconduct involving your father. They're opening an investigation. David Carter's face went pale. Edward Pierce, he said, understanding immediately. He's warning us. Not just warning, Alicia corrected, her legal mind racing ahead. He's showing us how far he'll go. If we continue with the New York case, he'll expose every judge, every official who ever cooperated with them, starting with you, Dad. The snow fell heavier outside, blanketing the neighborhood in white silence. In this room, where Alicia had dreamed of becoming a lawyer, of fighting for justice, the complexities of that fight were becoming painfully clear. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. Ask your father about June 12th, 2008. Ask him what really happened to the evidence in the Riverside development case. She showed the message to her father, watching as recognition and fear flickered across his face. There's more, isn't there? She asked quietly. More cases, more compromises. David nodded slowly. The Pierces, they never asked for anything obvious. Small things at first, procedural decisions, scheduling choices. By the time they needed something bigger, they already owned a piece of your soul. Detective Bennett's phone chimed with an update from New York. Edward Pierce just called a press conference. He's announcing an internal investigation into historical corporate practices, making it sound like he's cooperating, while actually threatening everyone involved. Classic misdirection, Alicia noted. He's letting every judge, every official, who ever helped them know that if he goes down, they all do. The implications were staggering. How many careers, how many families would be destroyed if the full scope of the Pierce influence was exposed? And yet, how many lives had already been damaged by the protection that influence had bought? Elizabeth Carter appeared in the doorway, her principal's authority showing in her straight spine and clear gaze. I just got a call from the school board, she announced. They're convening an emergency meeting to discuss concerns about historical financial oversight. The pattern was clear now. The Pierces weren't just threatening Alicia's father, but her entire family. Every pressure point, every vulnerability they had ever collected was being activated. Alicia's phone lit up with another message from Leonardo. My father's activating every connection he has, but I found something in the old files, a backup server that might have copies of everything, every case, every judge, every payment, if we can access it. She showed the message to Detective Bennett, whose eyes narrowed in thought. That kind of evidence could change everything. Instead of letting them threaten people one by one, we could expose the entire system at once, and destroy dozens of families in the process, David added quietly, including ours. Alicia looked around her childhood bedroom, at the debate trophies that spoke of her belief in justice, at the family photos that showed love and pride, at her father, who had tried to protect his family the only way he knew how. Maybe, she said finally, that's what needs to happen. Maybe the only way to break this cycle is to expose everything, not just the Pierce's crimes, but the whole system that enabled them. Her father stood slowly, years of judicial authority, warring with personal shame. If you do this, if you expose everything, I'll lose more than my reputation. There could be criminal charges. I know, Alicia replied, her heart breaking even as her resolve strengthened. But how many more families will be trapped in this cycle if we don't end it now? Detective Bennett's phone buzzed with another update. Edward Pierce's press conference just ended. He's announced a multi-million-dollar victims' compensation fund, making it look like corporate responsibility, while actually trying to buy silence. He's getting desperate, Alicia observed. He knows what Leonardo found. He's trying to contain the damage. Outside, the Chicago snow continued to fall, covering the city in a deceptive blanket of purity. But beneath that clean white surface, decades of secrets and compromises were beginning to surface. Elizabeth Carter joined them, her hand finding her husband's. Whatever you decide, she told Alicia, whatever comes out, we're your parents. That doesn't change. The moment was interrupted by another text from Leonardo. Server location confirmed, but we need to move fast. My father's tech team is already trying to wipe it. Alicia looked at her parents, at Detective Bennett, at the life she had built on a foundation she now knew was compromised. The choice before her was impossible: protect her family or expose a system that had damaged countless lives. We go forward, she said finally. We expose everything, not just the Pierces, not just Dad's cases, but all of it. The whole network of power and privilege and protection. Her father nodded slowly, acceptance replacing fear in his eyes. Then let me help. I know names, dates, cases that aren't in any files. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Detective Bennett was already on her phone, coordinating with her team in New York. The scope of the investigation was about to expand dramatically, touching powerful families across multiple states. As they began the painful process of documenting David Carter's involvement in the Pierce machine, Alicia realized that family ties worked both ways. The same connections that had been used to pressure and control could now be used to expose and reform. The snow falling outside her childhood window reminded her of another truth. Sometimes, the cleanest path forward required exposing everything to the cold light of day. The Pierce empire had been built on family ties, on loyalty and silence, on shared secrets and mutual protection. Now, those same ties would be its undoing. Edward Pierce had thought to weaken their case by threatening Alicia's family. Instead, he had given them the key to dismantling his entire system of influence. The truth, once started, would spare no one, not the Pierces, not the Carters, not any of the families who had participated in decades of privileged protection. As night fell over Chicago, Alicia Carter prepared for a battle that would redefine not just her own family's legacy, but the very nature of power and accountability in their society. The ties that bound them would either strangle the truth or set it free, and she was determined to ensure it was the latter. Chapter 8: Breaking Points. The security alarm pierced the pre-dawn Manhattan air, its shrill warning echoing through empty streets. Detective Sophia Bennett's car screeched to a halt outside Alicia Carter's law office, emergency lights painting the building's facade in alternating red and blue. The front window lay in shards across the sidewalk, and crude messages had been spray-painted across the elegant signage. Liar and drop the case. Alicia stood motionless in the building's entrance, surveying the damage. Her normally immaculate office had been ransacked, files strewn across the floor, computers smashed, and a familiar message painted across her desk. Some people should learn when to be quiet. Professional job, Bennett noted, examining the broken window. They knew exactly how to get in without triggering the main security system. The alarm only went off when they wanted it to. This was a message, not a robbery. They're getting desperate, Alicia replied, carefully picking her way through the debris. The backup server Leonardo found has them scared. Her phone buzzed Leonardo himself, calling from a secure line they'd set up after the Chicago revelations. Turn on the news, he said, without preamble. It's happening now. The small TV in the office break room had survived the vandalism. Alicia and Detective Bennett watched as Leonardo Pierce stood before a forest of microphones on the steps of the state capitol. He looked different. Gone was the polished political air, replaced by a man who had reached his own breaking point. For generations, he began, his voice steady despite the visible strain on his face. The Pierce family has operated above the law. We have used our money and influence to cover up crimes, silence victims, and corrupt the very institutions meant to protect justice. I know this because I was part of it. I benefited from it, and on the night of October 15th, I perpetuated it. The assembled press corps erupted in questions, but Leonardo continued, his words cutting through the chaos. What happened at the Plaza Hotel was not a misunderstanding or a drunken mistake. It was the direct result of a system that taught me, and others like me, that we were untouchable. Today, I'm not only acknowledging my own actions, but also refusing any further protection from my family. Furthermore, I'm prepared to testify about the systematic corruption I have witnessed throughout my life. In the break room, Alicia and Detective Bennett exchanged glances. This wasn't just Leonardo breaking ranks. This was a complete repudiation of everything the Pierce Empire stood for. He's burning his bridges, Bennett observed. No going back now. Alicia's phone buzzed again, her father this time. Are you watching this? David Carter asked. Edward Pierce's lawyers just withdrew their opposition to unsealing my old case files. They're going to try to drown Leonardo's confession in a sea of other scandals. Let them, Alicia replied. The more they expose, the clearer the pattern becomes. The office cleanup crew arrived, supervised by Detective Bennett's team. As they began the process of restoring order, Alicia received another message, an email from William Foster, CEO of the Plaza Hotel Group. Meeting requested, neutral location. I have information about the security system tampering that goes beyond the Pierce family. Time to tell the whole story. Before she could respond, breaking news alerts began flooding her phone. Pierce Industries stock was in freefall, board members were resigning, and political allies were distancing themselves. The carefully constructed facade of power and respectability was cracking. Miss Carter, one of the cleanup crew, called from her office. There's something you should see. Behind her overturned desk, they found a hidden camera, professionally installed, probably weeks ago. The implications sent a chill through the room. How long had they been watching? What had they seen? This changes things, Detective Bennett said grimly. This wasn't just vandalism. They were sending a message and destroying evidence at the same time. Alicia's phone rang again, an unlisted number. She put it on speaker. Hello, Miss Carter. Edward Pierce's voice filled the room, smooth as ever despite the morning's events. I felt we should talk, one professional to another, about what's in everyone's best interest. About your son's confession, the vandalism of my office, the illegal surveillance? Alicia asked pointedly. About ending this before it destroys everything, not just my family, but yours. Your father's cases, your mother's school district, Detective Bennett's career. How many lives are you willing to sacrifice for your crusade? Alicia met Bennett's eyes, seeing her own resolve reflected there. This stopped being about sacrifice the moment we discovered how deep the corruption goes. This is about justice. Justice? Edward's laugh was cold. Justice is a luxury for those who can afford it. Ask your father. He understood that. Ask the dozens of other judges and officials who help maintain order. Sometimes the greater good requires compromise. The greater good? Alicia's voice rose. Is that what you tell yourself about all the women your family has silenced? All the lives you've destroyed to protect your privilege? We built this city, Edward snapped, his composure finally cracking. The Pierces and families like us, we created the system that keeps everything running. You want to tear it all down? Fine. But don't pretend you're doing it for justice. This is about revenge. No, Mr. Pierce. This is about change. Your son understood that. That's why he's standing up there right now, telling the truth for the first time in his life. The line went dead. On the TV, Leonardo was still speaking, laying bare decades of family secrets. The press corps had grown, drawn by the unprecedented spectacle of an empire's heir, a parent exposing its darkest corners. Detective Bennett's phone buzzed with updates from her team. The vandals had been caught on various security cameras, professional contractors, often used by Pierce Industries for specialized work. The evidence was mounting, but so were the stakes. They'll come after you harder now, Bennett warned. This confession of Leonardo's, it changes everything. They can't buy their way out anymore. Alicia nodded, surveying her ruined office. They've always used fear of exposure, fear of losing status or security. But what happens when people stop being afraid? As if in answer, her phone lit up with messages from other victims, other witnesses. Leonardo's confession had broken something loose, a dam of silence held in place by money and influence for generations. The cleanup continued around them as Alicia and Detective Bennett planned their next moves. The backup server Leonardo had identified needed to be secured before it could be wiped. William Foster's offer to talk needed to be vetted for traps. And somewhere in the city, Edward Pierce was undoubtedly planning his counterattack. "Want to know the real breaking point?" Alicia asked suddenly, picking up a framed photo of her parents that had survived the vandalism. "It's not when they threaten you or attack you. It's when you realize that staying silent makes you part of the system they built." Bennett understood. She'd seen it before, the moment when victims became advocates, when witnesses found their voices, when the fear of speaking out was finally outweighed by the cost of staying silent. Outside, media crews were arriving, drawn by news of the vandalism. Leonardo's confession had guaranteed that every development in the case would be scrutinized. The spotlight that the Pierces had tried to avoid was now permanently fixed on them. Alicia's phone buzzed one final time. A message from her father. "Mother and I are going public too. About everything. Your mother agrees. Enough hiding." The breaking points were multiplying, spreading through the carefully constructed network of power and privilege like cracks in a dam. Each new confession, each exposed secret, weakened the structure further. As morning fully dawned over Manhattan, Alicia Carter stood in her vandalized office, watching Leonardo Pierce dismantle his family's legacy on live television. The path forward was clearer now, though no less dangerous. The system they were fighting would not fall easily. It would lash out, destroy lives, expose secrets. But something fundamental had changed. The fear that had protected the powerful for so long was dissolving, replaced by a different kind of strength. It wasn't just about one case anymore, or one family's corruption. It was about breaking free from a system built on silence and privilege. Detective Bennett moved to stand beside her, both women watching the media circus growing outside, ready for what comes next. Alicia nodded, her resolve strengthened by the morning's events. The vandalism, Leonardo's confession, Edward's threats, they all pointed to the same truth. The old system was reaching its breaking point, and from those breaks, something new would emerge. The war for justice had entered a new phase. The powerful were still fighting, but their greatest weapon, fear, was losing its edge. As Alicia began directing the cleanup of her office, she knew that more breaking points would come, but each one would bring them closer to their goal, a world where money and influence couldn't buy immunity from justice. The true test would be what emerged from these broken pieces. What kind of system would replace the one they were dismantling? But for now, in this moment of chaos and revelation, one thing was clear. There was no going back. The breaking points had become turning points, and the path forward, though difficult, was unmistakable. Chapter 9. The trial. The Manhattan Criminal Court building stood as a fortress of justice, its Art Deco facade a stark contrast to the modern media circus that had transformed the surrounding streets into a temporary city of news vans, reporters, and protesters. Detective Sophia Bennett supervised the security preparations, knowing that today's proceedings would make history one way or another. Inside the courtroom, Alicia Carter sat at the prosecution table, reviewing her notes one final time. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of preparations, depositions, and increasing pressure from all sides. The backup server Leonardo had identified had yielded a treasure trove of evidence, decades of correspondence, financial records, and internal communications that painted a damning picture of systematic corruption. The gallery filled quickly with journalists, legal observers, and representatives from New York's most powerful families. Many faces showed the strain of recent revelations. Leonardo's public confession had triggered a cascade of exposures that touched every corner of high society. Edward Pierce entered with his diminished, but still impressive legal team. He looked older somehow, the events of recent weeks having taken their toll on his usually commanding presence. His eyes met Alicia's briefly, and she saw something there she hadn't expected, not anger or defiance, but a tired recognition that everything was about to change. Judge Mariana Lopez called the court to order, her voice carrying the weight of the moment's historical significance. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to address the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case. What started as a single incident has exposed patterns of behavior and institutional corruption that extend far beyond these proceedings. However, this court's focus must remain on the specific charges before us." Victoria Salazar, the lead prosecutor, rose for her opening statement. She had worked closely with Alicia and Detective Bennett to craft a narrative that would connect the individual assault to the broader pattern of abuse of power. "Your Honor, members of the jury, Salazar began, her voice steady and clear. "This case is about more than one night at the Plaza Hotel. It's about a system that allowed powerful men to act with impunity, secure in the knowledge that their money and influence would shield them from consequences. Today, we will prove not just that Leonardo Pierce assaulted Alicia Carter, but that his actions were part of a calculated pattern enabled by generations of privilege and protection." Nathan Caldwell, still leading Edward Pierce's defense team, despite the upheaval of recent weeks, countered with a strategy that attempted to separate Leonardo's individual actions from the broader allegations of systemic corruption. "The prosecution would have you believe that this case represents some grand conspiracy," Caldwell argued smoothly. "They want to put an entire social class on trial. But the only question before this court is what happened in one hotel room on one night. Everything else is a distraction." The first day of testimony focused on establishing the immediate facts of the assault. Hotel employees, despite obvious pressure from their corporate superiors, testified about the security system's suspicious malfunction. Technical experts explained how the Pierce protocol had been used to manipulate electronic records across multiple properties. But it was the testimony of Sofia Morales, the woman from Judge Carter's old case, finally located by Detective Bennett's team, that shifted the trial's momentum. She spoke quietly but firmly about her own experience 15 years ago, describing a pattern so similar to Alicia's that several jurors visibly reacted. "They didn't just cover it up," Morales explained, her voice gaining strength. "They made it disappear so completely that I started to doubt my own memories until I saw Miss Carter on the news, telling the same story. That's when I knew I had to come forward." During a brief recess, Alicia found herself alone with Leonardo in the courthouse corridor. He would take the stand the next day, and the weight of that impending testimony showed in every line of his face. "My father's lawyers contacted me again," he said quietly. "Offered me one last chance to come to my senses. They don't understand that this is the first time I'm seeing things clearly." Alicia studied him. The man who had attacked her that night at the plaza seemed like a stranger now, barely recognizable in the person before her. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" "No," he admitted with a bitter laugh. "How can anyone be ready to testify against their own father, to admit to crimes they've spent years justifying? But I'll do it because you were right. The only way to break this cycle is to expose everything." The next morning brought Leonardo's testimony. The courtroom fell silent as he took the stand, every eye fixed on the heir apparent who had chosen truth over family loyalty. "The night at the plaza wasn't an isolated incident," he began, his voice steady despite the visible tension in his shoulders. "It was the culmination of years of conditioning. From childhood, we were taught that rules were for other people. When problems arose, they disappeared, handled by lawyers, bought by money, erased by influence." He described growing up in a world where consequences were for the poor or powerless, where any desire could be satisfied if you knew the right people and paid the right price. His father sat stone-faced as Leonardo detailed the network of corrupt officials, compromised security systems, and strategic payoffs that had protected the Pierce family for generations. "The protocol wasn't just about covering up incidents," he explained. "It was about maintaining the illusion of our untouchability. Every successful cover-up reinforced our belief that we were above the law. Every silenced victim confirmed our power." During cross-examination, Caldwell tried to paint Leonardo's testimony as an act of revenge against a demanding father, but the young senator's responses remained measured and specific, backed by documents and records the Detective Bennett team had recovered from the backup server. The trial's momentum shifted dramatically when Salazar called Edward Pierce himself to the stand. The elder Pierce maintained his composure through initial questioning about corporate policies and security procedures, but when Salazar began presenting emails and internal memos spanning decades, the facade began to crack. "Mr. Pierce," Salazar pressed, holding up a particularly damning document. "This email from 1998 discusses the need to maintain our traditional arrangements with hotel security teams. Can you explain what those arrangements entailed?" Edward's mask of corporate authority slipped for a moment. "We had certain understandings with various properties for the safety and privacy of our family and associates. Privacy like the kind you tried to buy for your son after the Plaza incident? Or privacy like you arranged for your brother in 2003, or your father in 1985. The pattern of generational abuse of power emerged clearly through document after document, witness after witness. Former hotel employees described the fear of losing their jobs if they reported incidents. Judges, including Alicia's father, testified about the subtle and not-so-subtle pressures applied to keep certain cases from proceeding. Throughout it all, Detective Bennett sat in the gallery, watching the system she had fought against for years finally being exposed to public scrutiny. Her team had worked tirelessly to protect witnesses, secure evidence, and prevent any last-minute attempts to suppress testimony. As the trial entered its final phase, Alicia took the stand. She described not just the assault, but the subsequent attempts to silence her. The threats, the vandalism of her office, the surveillance. Her testimony connected all the threads: the individual crime, the systematic cover-up, the generational pattern of abuse. The night at the plaza changed everything, she concluded, looking directly at the jury, not because of what happened in that room, but because, for the first time, someone said no. No to the money. No to the threats. No to the idea that power brings immunity. In his closing argument, Caldwell made a final attempt to separate Leonardo's actions from the broader allegations of corruption, but Salazar's closing statement brought everything full circle. This case began with one woman refusing to be silenced, she told the jury. It expanded to expose a system of privilege and protection that has operated in our city for generations. But ultimately, it comes down to a simple question: is justice only for those who can afford to buy it, or does it apply equally to everyone? As the jury retired to deliberate, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The trial had become more than a legal proceeding. It was a referendum on power, privilege, and accountability in modern society. Detective Bennett joined Alicia at the prosecution table, both women watching Edward Pierce huddled with his legal team. Whatever the verdict, the detective said quietly, "You've already won. The system can't go back to operating in shadows now that everything's been exposed." Alicia nodded, thinking of all the other women who had come forward during the trial. All the officials who had finally spoken about the pressures they'd faced. All the evidence of corruption that could no longer be buried. The trial had become a turning point, not just for her and Leonardo, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by money or influence. The bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. As everyone rose for the jury's return, Alicia caught Leonardo's eye across the courtroom. In that moment, they weren't victim and assailant, crusader and confessor. They were two people who had chosen truth over power, justice over privilege, change over tradition. The verdict would be read, but the real judgment had already been rendered in the court of public opinion and historical record. The trial had exposed not just individual crimes, but a generational pattern of abuse of power that could no longer be maintained in silence and shadows. Chapter 10. Reconciliation. The verdict had landed like a thunderclap in the Manhattan courtroom, guilty on all counts. Now, 2 weeks later, Alicia Carter sat in Central Park, watching autumn leaves spiral down against a steel-gray sky. The media frenzy had finally begun to subside, leaving space for deeper reflections on everything that had happened since that night at the plaza. Detective Sophia Bennett approached along the winding path, carrying 2 coffee cups. She had become more than just an investigator during these months. She was now a trusted friend and ally. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing Alicia one of the cups. "Leonardo's sentencing hearing is tomorrow. Have you seen the pre-sentencing report?" Alicia nodded, though she already knew the details. They had been leaked to every major news outlet in the city. Community service, rehabilitation program. Suspended sentence conditional on compliance, Bennett confirmed, settling onto the bench beside her. Some people are calling it too lenient. Others say it's appropriate given his cooperation in exposing the broader corruption. The aftermath of the trial had sent shockwaves through New York society. Edward Pierce had resigned from his company's board. Multiple judges had stepped down, and hotel security protocols across the city were being completely overhauled. The system of privilege and protection that had operated for generations was being dismantled piece by piece. "Did I tell you he wrote me a letter?" Alicia pulled an envelope from her bag. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural, nothing like the sloppy signature on the police report from that first night. Bennett raised an eyebrow. "What did he say?" "He wants to meet, to talk about using his resources, what's left of them. Anyway, to create a foundation focused on preventing sexual assault and supporting survivors." The detective's expression remained carefully neutral. "How do you feel about that?" Before Alicia could answer, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Another prominent family had been implicated in the ongoing investigation spawned by the trial. The domino effect continued, each revelation leading to more exposed corruption, more resignations, more changes in how power operated in the city. I keep thinking about what you said during the trial, Alicia mused, watching a jogger navigate the leaf-strewn path, about how some wounds need to be exposed to heal properly. Maybe that's true for people as well as systems. The meeting was set for the following afternoon, after Leonardo's sentencing. The location they chose was symbolic, a small conference room at the Women's Legal Aid Society, where Alicia had first started her career as an advocate for survivors. Leonardo arrived alone, having declined the security detail his family's remaining loyalists had insisted upon. He looked different, humbled, but also somehow more authentic than the polished political figure he'd once been. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he began, remaining standing until Alicia gestured for him to sit. "I know, after everything that happened started with choices," Alicia interrupted quietly. "Your choices that night at the plaza, my choices in pursuing justice, your choice to break ranks and tell the truth. We're here because of all of those decisions." He nodded, accepting the weight of her words. "The foundation idea, it's not an attempt to buy forgiveness or rehabilitate the Pierce name. I've been talking with other survivors, learning about the real impact of what our family enabled for so long. I want to do something meaningful to address it." Detective Bennett, who had insisted on being present for the meeting, watched their interaction with professional interest. She had seen many confrontations between victims and perpetrators over her career, but this was different. This was about transforming a system, not just addressing individual crimes. "Tell me about your vision for the foundation," Alicia said finally. Leonardo pulled out a tablet, bringing up a detailed proposal. The focus would be threefold: prevention through education, support for survivors, and systemic change in how institutions handle assault cases. "I've already reached out to several advocacy groups for guidance," he explained. As he walked through the plans, Alicia studied him carefully. The entitled man who had forced his way into her hotel room was gone, replaced by someone struggling to make amends in a meaningful way. "There's something else," he added, hesitating slightly. "I want you to have a role in this, not just as a consultant or board member, but as an equal partner in shaping its direction. Your experience, both personal and professional, would be invaluable." The proposal hung in the air between them, laden with implications. Working together would mean regularly confronting the history that had brought them to this point. It would mean transforming their connection from victim and perpetrator into something more complex, partners in preventing others from experiencing what had happened at the plaza. "I'll need to think about it," Alicia replied carefully. "This isn't a decision to make lightly," Leonardo nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "Of course. The foundation will proceed either way. I owe that much to all the women our family's influence silenced over the years. But having you involved would give it more credibility, more authenticity." Detective Bennett, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "How are you handling the fallout with your father?" A shadow crossed Leonardo's face. "We haven't spoken since the verdict. He's in Switzerland now, officially for health reasons. The family is fractured. Some support the changes I'm trying to make. Others see me as a traitor to our class." "And you?" Alicia asked softly. "How do you see yourself?" He considered the question carefully. "I see myself as someone who got lost in privilege and power, who did terrible things because of it, and who now has a responsibility to create something meaningful from the wreckage." The meeting stretched on, moving from formal proposals to deeper discussions about accountability, redemption, and the possibility of creating positive change from negative experiences. Outside the conference room window, the city continued its eternal rhythm, unaware that within this small space, a remarkable transformation was taking place. As evening approached, Alicia found herself walking through the park again, this time alone with her thoughts. The foundation proposal sat in her bag, along with Leonardo's letter and the latest news clippings about the ongoing investigations. Her phone buzzed a message from her father. The investigations sparked by the trial had forced him to resign from several boards, but his public acknowledgement of his role in the Pierce system had brought its own kind of peace. "Proud of you," the message read simply. Another news alert. Edward Pierce had officially transferred control of his remaining assets to a trust, with strict provisions about their use for social justice initiatives. Whether this was a genuine attempt at redemption or a calculated move to salvage some of the family's reputation remained to be seen. Alicia thought about transformations, how the city's power structure was being reorganized, how her own life had changed since that night at the plaza, how Leonardo had evolved from attacker to ally. The process wasn't clean or easy, but it was necessary. Detective Bennett called as Alicia reached her apartment. "Thought you should know. 3 more women have come forward about similar incidents with other prominent families. They said watching you stand up to the Pierces gave them courage." The ripple effect continued, each revelation leading to more truth, more accountability, more change. The reconciliation taking place wasn't just between individuals, it was between power and responsibility, privilege and justice, past and future. Later that night, Alicia sat at her desk, looking out over the city lights. The foundation proposal lay before her, along with a blank piece of paper where she had started listing her own ideas for its structure and mission. The path forward wasn't clear, but the first steps had been taken. Working with Leonardo would be complicated, forcing both of them to constantly confront their shared history. But maybe that was necessary. Maybe real change required keeping the painful parts of the past visible while building something new. She began to write, outlining her vision for how the foundation could address not just individual incidents, but the systemic issues that had protected perpetrators for so long. As her pen moved across the paper, she realized that this, too, was a form of reconciliation, not forgetting or forgiving, but transforming tragedy into positive action. The city outside her window was changing, its power structures being reorganized in ways that would have seemed impossible months ago. And in a small way, in this quiet moment of decision, she was part of that change. Tomorrow, she would call Leonardo and agree to help shape the foundation's future, not because she had forgiven him, but because sometimes reconciliation meant building something meaningful from the broken pieces of the past. Together, they would work to ensure that what happened at the plaza never happened to anyone else. The night deepened around her as she continued to write, each word a step toward a future where power and privilege could no longer buy immunity from justice. The reconciliation was beginning not just between individuals, but between what had been and what could be. Chapter 11. Justice and Healing. 8 months after the verdict, the landscape of power in New York had begun its slow but steady transformation. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office had established a specialized investigation unit, with Detective Sophia Bennett selected to lead a team focused on cases involving abuse of power and institutional corruption. While still holding her detective rank, her appointment to head this pioneering unit marked a significant step in her career and in the city's approach to justice. Alicia Carter stood at the podium, in the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, the same hotel where everything had begun, now taking its first steps toward institutional change. The initial symposium of the Pierce-Carter Initiative for Survivor Support and System Change was underway, bringing together advocates, survivors, law enforcement, and reformed power brokers. "When I checked into this hotel last year," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions the space still stirred, "I thought I was just celebrating my 35th birthday. Instead, I found myself at the beginning of a journey that would expose decades of systematic abuse of power and privilege." The audience included faces both familiar and new. Detective Bennett sat in the front row, her new role as head of the specialized unit a testament to her dedication and expertise. Sophia Morales, the woman from Judge Carter's old case, had become a powerful speaker for their cause, helping other survivors find their voices. "Justice isn't just about verdicts or sentences," Alicia continued. "It's about beginning the long process of changing the systems that enable abuse, about taking the first steps toward transforming how power operates in our society. These past 8 months have shown us both how difficult and how necessary that change is." At the side of the stage, Leonardo Pierce waited for his turn to speak. His community service had evolved into a committed effort toward reform, working alongside Alicia to build something meaningful from the ashes of his family's corrupt empire. The initiative's early work had already begun to show promise. The Plaza Hotel had implemented new security protocols, serving as a pilot program for other properties. A whistleblower support system, funded by recovered Pierce assets, was in development to protect employees who exposed misconduct by powerful guests. But numbers and policies don't tell the whole story, Alicia emphasized. The real measure of our progress lies in the small but significant changes we're beginning to see. in the growing willingness of survivors to come forward, in the increasing commitment to accountability from institutions that once prized discretion above all. She gestured to the side of the stage, inviting Leonardo to join her. The symbolism of their shared presence, victim and perpetrator, turned allies in reform, was not lost on anyone in the room. 8 months ago, I stood in a courtroom and admitted to crimes that my privilege had taught me to justify, Leonardo began, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Today, I stand here not seeking forgiveness, but committed to the long process of ensuring that the power structures that enabled those crimes are gradually dismantled and rebuilt with accountability at their core. Detective Bennett watched the interaction with professional interest. Her specialized unit had already begun investigating similar patterns of abuse and cover-up in other powerful institutions, each case building on the lessons learned from the Pierce investigation. The symposium continued throughout the day, with sessions on everything from trauma-informed security practices to institutional accountability measures. Alicia moved between discussions, noting how the conversations had evolved from outrage at exposed corruption to practical steps towards systemic change. During a break, she found herself in a quiet corridor with Detective Bennett. "Did you ever imagine, that first morning at the precinct, that we'd end up here?" Bennett smiled slightly. "I knew you were different from the moment you refused to be silenced. But this," she gestured at the symposium around them, "this is the beginning of something important." The initiative's work was still primarily focused in New York, with plans for gradual expansion as they refined their approaches and learned from early experiences. Edward Pierce, still in Switzerland, was bound by legal agreements to fund reform efforts, his remaining wealth now dedicated to undoing the damage his family had caused. Miss Carter, a young woman, approached hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you. Your story, what you did, it gave me the courage to report what happened to me. The detective they assigned to my case, she's actually here today, part of the new training program. These moments happen more frequently now. Survivors finding their voices, law enforcement adapting their approaches, institutions beginning to accept accountability. The healing was happening on both individual and systemic levels, though everyone understood the path ahead was long." Later that afternoon, Alicia moderated a panel discussion on transformative justice, featuring Leonardo alongside other reform power brokers who had chosen to become part of the solution. The conversation was frank, sometimes uncomfortable, but necessary for true change. "The hardest part," one panelist admitted, "is acknowledging that we weren't just individuals making bad choices. We were part of a system that taught us those choices were acceptable, even entitled. Breaking free from that mindset means confronting not just our actions, but our entire worldview." As evening approached, the symposium shifted to a recognition ceremony, honoring the various people who had helped expose the corruption and initiate change. Detective Bennett's specialized unit was acknowledged for its groundbreaking work. Sophia Morales was recognized for her courage in coming forward after 15 years of silence. Alicia's parents attended the ceremony, their own journey of accountability and healing having become part of the larger narrative. Judge Carter's public acknowledgement of his past compromises had inspired other officials to begin confronting their own histories, creating a gradual cascade of transparency that continued to reshape the city's power structures. The initiative's next steps were carefully planned, expanding their survivor support services within New York, developing comprehensive training programs for hotel and security staff, partnering with law schools to study and prevent systemic abuse of power. The work was far from over, but the path forward was becoming clearer. After the ceremony, Alicia found a quiet moment to visit room 1156. The hotel management had initially been reluctant to let her see it, but had eventually understood the importance of confronting the past directly. The room looked different now, renovated as part of the hotel's initial security upgrades. The electronic locks had been replaced with a new system designed with multiple safeguards. A panic button had been installed beside the bed, small changes that represented larger transformations still to come. Detective Bennett found her there, understanding without words the significance of the moment. "The preliminary data from the specialized unit is encouraging," she said quietly. "Reports of misconduct by powerful guests are up 200% across our pilot hotels, not because there are more incidents, but because people feel safer reporting them now." Alicia finished, "because they believe they'll be heard." They walked together to the closing reception, where Leonardo was deep in conversation with hotel security executives. about implementing new protocols. The man who had once exploited the system's weaknesses was now dedicated to strengthening its protections. "Sometimes I still can't believe we're working together," Alicia admitted to Bennett. "There are moments when I see him and remember that night, but then I see the work he's doing to create change, and I understand that justice can take unexpected forms." The reception continued around them, a mix of survivors, advocates, law enforcement, and reformed power brokers, all working toward common goals. The healing wasn't perfect, or complete. Some wounds would always leave scars, but it was real and ongoing. As the evening wound down, Alicia delivered closing remarks that captured the journey from that October night to this moment of transformation. Justice and healing aren't destinations we reach, but paths we walk together. Each step forward, whether it's a new policy implemented, a survivor finding their voice, or a powerful person choosing accountability, moves us closer to the world we're trying to create. The next day's newspapers would carry stories about the symposium, about the initiative's work, about the continuing investigations and reforms. But the real story was in the quieter moments, the conversations between survivors and advocates, the commitments to change from reformed perpetrators, the steady work of building new systems based on accountability rather than privilege. Detective Bennett's specialized unit would continue its investigations, uncovering more corruption, but also finding more allies in unexpected places. The initiative would expand its work, gradually reaching more survivors and creating more change. And Alicia and Leonardo would continue their unlikely partnership, transforming tragedy into progress. The healing wasn't just happening on an individual level. It was beginning to reshape institutions, alter power structures, create new possibilities for justice. What had started in room 1156 had become a movement for systemic change, proving that even the deepest wounds could lead to meaningful transformation. Chapter 12. A new dawn, 1 year to the day after the night that changed everything. Alicia Carter stood before the New York State Bar Association's annual conference. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was filled with legal professionals, activists, and media, all gathered to hear about the first steps of change that had begun to reshape the city's power structure over the past year. Detective Sophia Bennett sat in the front row, her role as head of the Special Investigations Unit having already begun to influence how law enforcement handled cases involving wealth and power. Beside her sat Sofia Morales and other survivors who had become vocal advocates for change. In the middle of the audience, Leonardo Pierce listened intently, his presence a testament to how far they had all come. "A year ago," Alicia began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced power and begun its transformation, "I stood in a hotel room, facing what I thought was the worst moment of my life. Today, I understand that moment was actually the beginning of something important, not just for me, but for our entire community." The past year's initial achievements scrolled on screens behind her. The Pierce Carter Initiative had launched its first survivor support center in Manhattan. The Plaza Hotel's new security protocols were being evaluated for implementation at 5 other major hotels. A pioneering training program for law enforcement officers was showing promising early results. Most importantly, survivors were beginning to be heard and believed. But statistics and programs don't tell the real story, Alicia continued. The real story is in the beginning of cultural change around power and privilege. It's in the corporations starting to implement accountability measures, in the hotels prioritizing guest safety over guest status, in the courts beginning to treat everyone equally, regardless of their wealth or influence. As she spoke, Alicia caught glimpses of familiar faces in the audience. Her father, former Judge Carter, was developing an ethics curriculum for law schools, using his own story to educate future lawyers about moral courage. Her mother had begun implementing new accountability policies in her school district, creating potential models for institutional change. The journey from victim to advocate isn't linear, she acknowledged. Neither is the path from perpetrator to reformer, or from a broken system to functioning one. But every step forward matters. Every voice raised makes a difference. Every person who chooses accountability over impunity helps create the change we need. Leonardo took the stage next, his transformation from entitled heir to dedicated reformer evident in every word and gesture. "A year ago, I was part of the problem, someone who used power and privilege as weapons. Today, I stand before you, committed to being part of the solution, not seeking forgiveness, but working to create meaningful change." The Pierce-Carter Initiative had established its first programs for transformative justice, showing how resources once used to protect privilege could be redirected toward preventing harm and supporting survivors. Edward Pierce, watching the live stream from his Swiss exile, would see his son not as the family disappointment, but as the architect of its most meaningful legacy. Detective Bennett presented next, describing how the Special Investigations Unit had begun addressing systemic issues. "We're not just investigating cases," she explained. "We're beginning to change how power operates in our city, developing structures that protect everyone equally." As the conference continued, Alicia observed the interactions around her, survivors sharing stories with advocates, reformed perpetrators learning from their experiences, law enforcement and legal professionals committed to incremental but real change. The walls between these groups, once seemingly impenetrable, were starting to become bridges for understanding and progress. During a break, Alicia found herself standing with Leonardo and Detective Bennett, the unlikely trio who had catalyzed these first steps toward change. "Did you ever imagine," Leonardo asked, "that one night could lead to all this?" "The night wasn't the catalyst," Bennett corrected gently. "It was the choices made afterward. Alicia's choice to speak up, your choice to tell the truth, everyone's choice to pursue real change instead of easy solutions." As evening approached, Alicia delivered her closing remarks to the conference. "A year ago, I thought justice meant winning a case. Today, I understand that true justice is about beginning to transform systems, challenging assumptions, and creating spaces where everyone's dignity is protected and everyone's voice can be heard." The audience rose in a standing ovation, but Alicia's attention was caught by a young law student approaching the stage. "Your story inspired me to change my career path," the student said. "I want to help create the kind of change you've begun." This, Alicia realized, was the real victory, not just the initial reforms they'd started or the systems they'd begun to question, but the next generation they'd inspired to continue the work. The changes they'd initiated would grow outward, touching lives they'd never know about, creating possibilities they couldn't yet imagine. As the conference ended, Alicia, Leonardo, and Detective Bennett stood on the hotel's rooftop terrace, watching the sun set over Manhattan. The city sprawled before them, its familiar skyline now representing not just power and ambition, but the possibility of transformation and justice. "To new beginnings," Bennett proposed, raising her glass. "And to the people brave enough to make them happen," Leonardo added. Alicia smiled, thinking of all the survivors who had found their voices, all the systems that had begun to change, all the work still ahead. "To justice," she said simply, "and to the truth that makes it possible." The last rays of sunlight painted the city gold, a new day ending as another prepared to begin. In offices and precincts, in courtrooms and classrooms, in hotels and boardrooms across the city, the changes they had started would continue to grow, creating a world where power meant responsibility, where privilege carried accountability, and where justice was truly blind to wealth and status. Alicia's story had become more than just a legal victory or a personal triumph. It had become a catalyst for systemic change, a testament to the power of truth over silence, of accountability over impunity. As she watched the stars begin to appear over the city she had helped begin to transform, she understood that every ending was just another beginning in disguise. The work would continue, the changes would deepen, and the dawn they had helped create would light the way for others to follow. In the end, that was the greatest justice of all, not just winning a single battle, but changing how the war itself was fought. And somewhere in the city below, another survivor was finding their voice, another system was being questioned, another door was opening. The story that had begun in room 1156 would never truly end. It would live on in every life touched, every system challenged, every truth spoken in the face of power. The sun set on the year that had changed everything, but its light would continue to guide the way forward, illuminating paths toward justice that no one had imagined possible before that fateful night at the plaza. And in that light, anything seemed possible, even the gradual dawn of a truly just world.